Jayson Gaignard dropped out of high school at the age of 17 and began working as an auto mechanic. In 2004, Jayson founded VIP Services, a Toronto-based full-service concierge company. The company evolved into an online ticket seller and changed its name to Tickets Canada, which generated $5 million in annual sales. In 2012, Jayson began curating dinners in Toronto with small groups of entrepreneurs that focused on relationship building. The invite-only dinners became mastermind talks, larger conferences for entrepreneurs geared toward health, wealth, self-improvement, and networking. Past mastermind talk speakers include Tim Ferriss, Dave Asprey, and me, and many others. And Forbes also described Jayson as one of the top networkers to watch in 2015. Today, Jayson hosts mastermind talks in beautiful countries across the globe and spends his free time on his home, which is a farm, like my assistant Meredith does. I was also lucky enough to be able to attend the first 5 mastermind talks that Jayson put on. So I was able to witness his ability to build and foster a community like no other. And I mean this because I've worked with YPO and EO in 26 countries. I've worked with Vistage in 17 cities. I was an EO member for 5 years. I was a strategic coach member for 6 years, Genius Network member for 7 years. I've been to 3 baby bathwaters, 2 war rooms. The community that Jayson understood how to build and has built is powerful, and that's what he's here to share with us today. So Jayson, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Let me see if you can you see my screen?
Yep.
Thumbs up if you can. All right, Rob, it's good to see you, good sir. I'm seeing some familiar faces here. So excited. Cameron, thank you so much for the opportunity, my friend. So just a quick kind of temperature check. I mean, Cameron and I connected obviously in advance of today, and I decided to kind of redesign various different talks and kind of compile it into one. And one of the things I just wanted to do was just get, by show of hands, let me see if I get my clicker working. Show of hands, how many of you have heard of either myself or MMT sometime over the years? Not a lot of hands. That is heartbreaking. Ladies and gentlemen, don't believe everything you read online. That's lesson number 1. Lesson number 2, I call this a fast finger exercise. So I'd love for you, I'm watching the chat right now. One of the funny things I love, actually, I've never seen this in a group, is everybody has their Colby score. Or not everybody, there's good people have, a good portion of the group have their Colby score up. And yeah, it's the opposite of mine. I'm like a 9 quick start. So I need some of you guys in my life. But just quick show of hands, so to speak, and we're going to put it in the chat. I would love to know how many of you prefer the direction of this to be a lot more idea focus and high level versus tactical and actionable. So tactical and actionable, put that in the chat, or high level idea, throw that in the chat, and that'll help me kind of guide our conversation. It's a tactical group. Well, I'm glad, because I asked Cameron in advance and he said that we want tactics. If you want high level ideas, unfortunately, that's another slide deck. So we're good to go on that front. So we don't have a lot of time together. And I know we're gonna have an opportunity later to break into a little bit of a Q&A, but I did want to make this as tactical and actionable as possible. So first, right out of the gate, what this is not gonna be, I'm not gonna share much of my story, which is different, because especially since the majority of you are not familiar with both myself and my work, normally I like to kind of set up with a bit of the backstory on me and how relationships have played a huge role in my life, both from helping me achieve successes and helping me navigate some pretty serious times as well. But there's a saying that, you know, if you don't trust the messenger, you won't trust the message. I'm hoping that my relationship with Cameron over the last 10 years and that kind of credibility, we can bypass, again, a bit of my story, so we can go right into the meat and potatoes of some tactical stuff. Also, I'm not going to preach why relationships are important for a group like this. I'm sure I was listening, obviously, to some of your things that you were making mention of earlier. It's clear that you value relationships. I'd love nothing more than to stand on a soapbox and talk about why relationships are just critical to one's happiness and even longevity, and point to studies there. I'd love nothing more than to point to books like Keith Ferrazzi's Who Got Your Back, where he asked 1,000 people at random, who has your back? Surprisingly, 55% of people felt like nobody had their back. Even more surprisingly, 60% of those people are married. I'd love nothing more than to share why loneliness is an epidemic in today's society. There's a great book called War and Peace, written in 1869, where a quote was left: a numberless multitude of people of whom no one was close and no one was distant. And to me, that just illustrates how I feel we are in today's society. We are just drowning in contacts. And if I could just leave, I guess, on one thing to kind of set this container, 100% of your customers are people, 100% of your employees are people, 100% of your investors are people if you have investors. If you don't understand people, you don't understand business. So this is all going to be about how to nourish relationships, foster relationships, and again, get on the tactical side of things. So there's three things I want to leave you with here today. The first is a framework in how to invest in your most important relationships. And you can apply this in many different ways. You can apply it on the personal side, and that'll be the lens in which I kind of show it and teach it and storytell around it. But like Danny Meyer says, business, like life, is all about how you make people feel. It's that simple and it's that hard. You can easily apply this into business, into your customer experience. This is like some of the handwritten thank you notes we've had over the years at MMT, applying these principles to just the customer experience, one could say, or the member experience, the way we like to frame it. You can use these strategies when it comes to hiring new people for your team. You can also use these strategies to retain top talent. Also, for some of you are co-founders in the organizations that you're leading, maybe own equity or stock, what have you. But there's potentially some opportunities on the horizon, and investing relationships will potentially open those doors. And even, in the context of COO Alliance, again, the topic of relationship has come up time and time again as I was listening at the beginning of the call. So again, these things can be applied to that, or even arguably the most important relationship in our lives, the one with our spouses and our significant others. So that's the first thing I'm going to talk about, is a framework around that. The second one is a tactic I've applied to help make kind of friends and fans stakeholders in my success. By show of hands, how many of you have a hard time asking for help? So a few hands go up. I do as well. And this to me has been a great tool to get everyone to fly into formation and to support. And then the last thing I want to leave with you, I made this post on Facebook a couple months ago. Quality of our life comes down to the quality of our relationships. Quality of our relationships comes down to the quality of our conversations. Quality of our conversations comes down to the quality of our questions. And what I want to leave you with today is a set of questions that you could apply into team meetings. You could apply into, general day-to-day conversations. There's question card decks. This is probably a third of all the question card decks I've ever purchased. And I've curated over 400 of my favorite ones. And I'll share the list with you all towards the end of the conversation. A lot of people have applied these into retreats, team retreats, into daily stand-up meetings and that kind of stuff. So excited to share that. If you have crappy meetings, there's a great book for it, and you may want to incorporate some icebreakers. Maybe it'll liven them up a little bit. So if we're good to go, give me a thumbs up. Obama gives us a thumbs up as well. So I do need to know, there's going to be a lot. This is the first talk I ever gave 15 years ago. The piece of feedback I got was it felt like they were drinking out of a fire hose, but the water tasted good. You are all very smart, and I value your time immensely. So we're going to go through a lot, but there will be an opportunity for Q&A towards the end. So the first thing I want to talk about, again, was that framework in how to invest in your most important relationships. What I want to do to kind of set the container for that is ask you in the chat, what are some of the ways you invest in your most important relationships? This could be personal or professional. I would love to, I have the chat open here. So what are some of the ways you invest in your most important relationships? I may call on some people I know, like Rob, or I may call on Juan. Time, recognition, being present, in-depth listening, active listening, write letters. Selfishly, why I ask this is I always want to ensure that my I didn't miss anything when it came to my framework. Service, presence, listening, support, a lot of listening. This is you want to hear something funny? I'm not going to go on a big tangent, but to what Cameron alluded to, I run an invite-only community of entrepreneurs called MMT. One of the exercises we did a couple of years ago, we did a 360 survey So we sent out a survey to 10 to 15 of their closest friends, closest relationships, and it was used as an opportunity for them to like bring voice to that individual in the communities, their gifts and their strengths and those kind of things. And there was one line of like, what is a constructive piece of feedback that you can extend to, this person? 95% of the room, all entrepreneurs, 95% of the room, it was all around listening. Poor listeners. So I'm glad that listening comes up, and most of you work alongside an entrepreneur, so you can probably attest that that's a little bit of a challenge sometimes. So so this is great. The foundation for what I want to share really starts with relationship intelligence. So there's something called the ABCs of sales. Does anybody know what this film is? Put it in the chat. Let's see who gets it right. I will send you Glengarry. Okay, perfect. So somebody already jumped ahead of the queue. So always be closing. That is the general rule of thumb, the ABCs of sales. To me, the ABCs of being great at relationships or being a connector, which is a label I don't enjoy, but is a category I'm often put in, is always be collecting. So collecting, fascinating people to connect with, always be capturing, and always be curating. There's something called Dunbar's number where we can't have more than 150 stable social relationships. So if you have 5,000 Facebook friends or LinkedIn contacts, that's great, but it doesn't matter how many friends you can count, no matter how many friends you can count on. So may talk about that more later, but what I want to focus on is the actual art of capturing. And this again serves as the foundation for investing in relationships. So the first two areas, the first is capturing what they care about and who they care about. So Tony Robbins has a philosophy that if you want to influence somebody, figure out what already influences them. And I take that same approach when it comes to relationship building. If I want to love on someone, I find out about the things that they love, whether it be salsa dancing or making watches or rally racing or owning chickens or taking adventures. So I'm always capturing this in the context of a relationship. Doesn't matter if it's somebody on my team, doesn't matter if it's somebody who's a quote unquote a client, doesn't matter if even, it's my wife. I'm always capturing, what they care about, what people care about. Also capture who they care about. These are all the families and important family members of folks that are quote unquote clients of mine. So like that dog right there, that's Jack. He belongs to a friend of mine named Dev. The alpacas down there belong to a friend of mine named Carl. We live work in a rather unique business where we only have historically 150 people in the community at a time. And it was important for me to build a community that not only did I know everybody by name, but I knew the name of their spouse and their kids and that kind of stuff. And it's something we capture kind of company wide. So after capturing who they care about, what they care about, important dates and milestones is also critical. So if they launched a book or they launched a new company or achieved, did a marathon or whatever the case may be, this serves as a great foundation for what I'm going to build on next when it comes to the actual tactical side of investing in relationships. This can be done from a business perspective. This is a friend of mine, John Goodman, that has 1,300 of his best customers connected to a profile on Facebook. And his assistant is this profile, and she just monitors the Facebook newsfeed and captures things that come up that people post about. And he's very transparent of like that. This is what it's for, and his customer base they love it. And it serves him. The way he actually captures the information is he gets a breakdown, but we do it in our team like through our CRM. And actually, every weekly meeting, we as part of our weekly pulse, we bring voice to things that we noticed or we captured on our own over social media. So important dates and milestones. This other stuff here is important. It's more if you're focused on the connection side of things, but I'll bring voice to it regardless. The third component is capturing who they know. So just for me, the way I navigate the world is I'm always trying to solve the pain points of others through making connections. So anytime I find out that this person knows that person or what have you, I try to kind of capture it in a CRM. Also, what's important is finding out people's goals. And the quality of your questions will determine the quality of your answers, your responses. So oftentimes when you talk to somebody, you say like, hey, what are your goals for the next year? It's a rather boring question, and oftentimes you'll get a boring response. One of the, different frames that a friend of mine, Clay Hebert, came up with is actually, if we were to meet a year from today with a bottle of champagne, what are we celebrating? And I contextualize this, but I use it for if I meet somebody new at a networking event or what have you, I'll kind of pull it out of my back pocket and say, like, if we're meeting in Toronto a year from now with a bottle of champagne, or if we're at a health event, I'll say a bottle of kombucha, what are we celebrating? And oftentimes that question will like crack a smile, and it'll give me a really good understanding of like where they are and where they want to go. And then the next question to that, again, I'm trying to solve problems for people, and we'll talk more about that a little later, is I try to assess what are the obstacles kind of in their way. So in order to achieve that goal, what do you need to solve or overcome? And then the final piece is basically people's unique ability. So trying to figure out what they're world-class at and capturing that. These are all things that I tend to capture in a CRM. The first three, I think, would arguably be the most universal and important. So who they care about, what they care about, important dates and milestones. But again, all these kind of 6 areas are what I capture all in all. This serves as the foundation for the 6 ways to invest in relationships. So the easiest one is resources. If you can offer, a connection or a piece of feedback or a book to help them to get from where they are to where they want to go, that's a no-brainer. So that's the first way to invest in key relationships is supporting them with resources. The second one is something I call the biggest fan philosophy. There's a great book called The 5 Love Languages, and Gary Chapman has a quote that the art of listening, and listening came up time and time again in that chat, the art of listening is not to hear what someone says, but to hear how they feel. And marketers have a really strong, unique ability to put themselves in the shoes of their prospects and understand their model of the world, their wants, their needs, their fears, oftentimes better than they do. And I've taken that same approach when it comes to relationship building. An example I often like to use is somebody like this. This is a friend of mine named Lewis Howes. He actually spoke at MMT Year One, the event that Cameron made mention of. And back then, Lewis had a podcast or was getting a podcast off the ground. So he was very kind of early stage in his I guess, personal brand momentum, because he built an enormous podcast platform and also some books. And this is his first book that he ever wrote. And for me, again, if you put yourself in my shoes, and Lewis Howes is, let's say, your friend, or you have a friend that's publishing a book, what are some of the fears or apprehensions that someone would have in advance of launching their book? So put it in the chat. Anything, if you were Lewis Howes, what would be some of the fears you have before launching your book out to public? Bad reviews, no one reading it. Will anyone read it? People won't appreciate it. A dud. Thank you for the honesty. I love the language there. Rejection, no sales, 100%. Right? So for me, I'm asking myself, if I'm in his shoes, what if I don't sell any copies? What if nobody leaves reviews? What if they do leave reviews and they're negative reviews? So it becomes clear when you look at it from that perspective, how you can be his number 1 fan. In Lewis's case, leading up to the launch of his book, I mentioned it a bunch of times on social media. When the book launched, I bought like a bulk order of copies. And I was also the first one to leave a review. A friend of mine actually yesterday down at Pawnee wrote a book. It kind of came out of nowhere. I was the first one to leave a review. I take great pride in being the first one. So these are ways to kind of curb that fear. And when I'll talk about it later, but the best time to invest or make these investments in relationships or when people are most vulnerable. So that's kind of the biggest fan philosophy. It could also show up when people put out fundraisers on social media. I think the majority of people putting out, fundraiser out there in public are worried. There's fears of like, will this be well received? Will actually anybody donate? Will people think it's weird or awkward or whatever the case may be? So being their biggest fan is incredibly important. I'm going to share a video right now. If the audio doesn't work, just give me a thumbs down and we'll skip it because the setting, I don't know if I clicked it or not. That was by design, ladies and gentlemen. Basically, it was a video from a friend of mine, Dan Martell. He was getting married. He did a charity water campaign, and I was the first one to donate to the campaign. And people oftentimes, when they do something like that, they remember the first person to donate, and often the person who left the biggest donation. I don't want to be the person who leaves the biggest donation. Ideally, I want to be the person to leave the first one. So most organizations have a marketing budget that's pretty standard. For us at MMT, we have a biggest fan budget. So we have actually budget allocated aside so that when members launch something or whatever the case may be, we can ultimately support them. Maybe they're going to, they're going to do a marathon, they're trying to raise money for a cause or whatever the case may be. We have money set aside actually as an organization to support with those ventures. So again, what I alluded to earlier is when somebody's doing something kind of big, bold, and ambitious, thinking to like what are some of those fears that they may have, and them being, whatever those fears are. If you can squash those fears, it's a huge opportunity to kind of invest in that relationship. And a person I was actually going to try to pull a screenshot for it, but I was working on these slides for you all. Cameron is an incredible example of this. For context, we're in the live experience business. When the pandemic hit, our business went to zero overnight. Over the course of 18 months, our business was down 92%. I can't even count maybe on two hands the amount of text messages I got from Cameron over the course of 2 years, checking in. And not only just like checking in, but doing it in a really kind of thoughtful fashion. So I actually made this post on social media, and I apologize for it being so small. This was March of 2020. And I said, when the financial market takes a dip, the relationship economy is booming. There's a narrow window to invest in key relationships, and it's now. And I fundamentally believe that. I went in like full service mode at the beginning of the pandemic because there was so much uncertainty and that kind of stuff. So that's the biggest fan philosophy. The third one is thoughtful gifting. Now, I saw this also in the chat. There's a couple things. There's a great friend of, and I know Cameron has probably put his name on your radar before. John Ruhlin wrote a book called Giftology, which is a phenomenal book when it comes to using gifting as a tool to invest in key relationships. Couple of tools I'll kind of reiterate from the book and some observations on my own. So the first thing, I guess, trap-wise pertaining to using gifting as a tool to invest in relationships is actually around frequency. The mistake I often share is you have a specific date, whether it's a wedding anniversary, let's say, or a work anniversary or what have you. It can set an expectation that there's going to be like a gift every year. The example I often give is around like Christmas time. Let's say I get a bottle of wine from a service provider or what have you one year, and I don't get it the next year. There's that expectation that is set. And then now I'm sitting with all these fears of like, well, why didn't I get a bottle of wine this year? And we're no longer friends. Does she no longer value the relationship? So there's actually the expectation of frequency, which is problematic when it comes to gifting. And then also the expectation around like the bar, meaning if you gave me 2 bottles of wine last year and this year I get 1 bottle of wine, let's say, then again, it sets the bar and it can actually do more harm than good. A great example of this is my wife. She turned 30 not long ago, but when she turned 30, I bought her a 2-week trip to Egypt, and she loved it. And then when her 31st birthday came around, I was like, shit, what am I going to buy her now? Because now I set that expectation, like, your birthday is coming. Her birthday is actually tomorrow. I don't know what to do, but that's a side story. But regardless, when her 31st birthday came around, I had to reset those expectations a little bit. So that's one of the problems around gifting around a certain time or what have you. I much rather our gifting strategy, even like personally, is gifting around special, like one of a kind moments, so to speak. So even the idea around, like, we have a strategy where we gift around when people have their first child. It's above and beyond if you send a gift for someone's first child. We actually don't send a gift because that's kind of the noisiest time. We actually send a gift for the first Father's Day and the first Mother's Day. Like, there's no noise at that time, and they're only going to have one first Father's Day, only one first Mother's Day. So it's not getting into that trap of expectations. And sometimes giving no gift is better than giving a poor gift. I share this because there was a friend of mine, a friend of my wife, where she was working for a company for 10 years, and they gave her, on her 10-year anniversary, they gave her a $20 Starbucks gift card. And again, to me, it just reiterated the fact that, like, sometimes this stuff can go wrong if it's not well thought through. So there's a great book called 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, which is what works in the military works in marketing, and that's the unexpected. For me, the same is true when it comes to gift giving. What works in the military works in gift giving, and that's the unexpected. So trying to avoid those busy times of year, the busy seasons of Christmas, setting those expectations, and also moving away from perishables, because things like flowers, things like wine, things like chocolate, they're consumables and they become out of sight, out of mind. And this is very much within John Ruhlin's philosophy of, again, getting flowers, buying wine, buying chocolates, gift cards, that kind of stuff. They often find themselves in the generic perishable category, so people forget about it. You can move into the perishable, more personal side of things by maybe getting them the gift card. So one thing we have in place is when one of our clients moves to a new city, we oftentimes get gift cards for like 2 or 3 of the top restaurants for them and their family. But the thing is once they actually go to the restaurant, you know, they'll forget about it a year or 2 later. There's gifts that are generic but more permanent. So maybe it's like gifting an iPad, but you can also take a generic gift and personalize it, which is again very much along the lines of John Ruhlin's philosophy around like engraving things like knives and those kind of things. So we always try to do our gifting in a permanent kind of personal area. And it very much leans in this idea of like cost per impression. I can spend $1,000 on something that is consumable, but I can spend $1,000 on, let's say, knives like John Ruhlin does. And to this day, every Thanksgiving, we've probably given out maybe 100 set of knives over the years. Every Thanksgiving, I usually get 5 or 6 text messages of people like taking photos of their knife and saying like, hey, I'm using my knife. So that's a great example of like just being thoughtful and strategic when it comes to gifting. And again, just reminder, trying to not make these too cookie cutter. The best gifts are really personal and personalized and make people feel seen. So resources, biggest fan, gifting, gratitude. I remember seeing a thank you note come up in the chat, and that is spot on. There's a great quote from Coco Chanel: the best things in life are free. The second best things are very, very expensive. Feeling gratitude and not expressing it is like wrapping a present and not giving it. Again, getting back to the 5 love languages, words of affirmation is a big one for many. And thank you notes go a really, really long way, especially with your team. I think we oftentimes, you know, forget about that. Now, applying these to the actual inner circle, this is where things get interesting. So basically, supporting their inner circle with resources, their biggest fan, being their biggest fan, gifting, gratitude. It's not uncommon for me to reach out to a client's spouse and just say, thank you so much for allowing, you know, your husband or your wife to come to our live experience or whatever the case may be. To me, these are easy kind of wins. And the example I often share, and the audio is not going to work, unfortunately, but for those in Canada, this is a popular grocery store called Sobeys. It's overpriced. Swiss Chalet is terrible chicken, but we shop at Sobeys and we eat at Swiss Chalet. We also go to the Chelsea Hotel in Toronto. We stayed at some of the finest hotels in the world, but my daughter loves the Chelsea Hotel. And in this video, she brings voice to why she likes these places so much. And the reason is the Chelsea Hotel, which she adores, has a treasure chest behind the desk. So when you go to check in, she gets this 80-cent like plush toy. That's why we go to this silly Chelsea Hotel. That's why we go to Swiss Chalet, is the same thing. And when we go to Sobeys, the grocery store, they have little carts for kids. So if you want to care about somebody, care about who they care about. Again, you can pull out and use this when it comes to your team, pull out and use this when it comes to your client base. This is an example of something I love finding friends of mine or clients when they're traveling and surprising them with an amenity that's like, you know, at their hotel waiting for them. So this was an example of one. A client of mine was going to the Four Seasons in Mexico, and I knew he was going with his family and his son, so I sent his son like a slew of things. It actually turned out in another message, his father had cancer. This was going to be the last trip they ever took together as a family. So it was just like extra meaningful. So applying these to the inner circle. Again, the power of a check-in. This is something Cameron does beautifully. Capturing things like moving dates or having a child or somebody's launching something like a podcast. This is how most people navigate checking in. It's these, you know, cookie cutter messages from LinkedIn or what have you. And you can see this one here. This person reached out August 2nd, October 10th, November 22nd with all the same messages, right? And this can be, to me, can almost do more damage than good, versus using the relationship intelligence as a baseline, and then, you know, reaching out and giving good context. So when somebody's launching a business or what have you, or, you know, maybe they're becoming a first-time father. This is an example I was walking downtown King Street in Toronto. A friend of mine used to own a bunch of restaurants on King Street and now lives in Costa Rica. So when I was walking on King Street, I thought of him, recorded him a 20-second video. That's all it took. And that was a great way for me to just touch base and invest in that relationship. So this is the 6 different ways I invest in relationships. When you do this well, it enables people to feel seen. And as Maya Angelou famously said, people forget what you said, people forget what you did, so people will never forget how you made them feel, which is generally why I hate when people ask, how can I help you? Because to me, you're putting the onus on the other individual to come up with a way. And if you do this right and you capture that relationship intelligence, there's a bunch of ways that will emerge as far as how you can help and how you can support. So that is thing number 1. The next 2 are a little kind of quicker, so we can move into a Q&A. This one actually, and you'll see there's another nod to Cameron in this one. It's how to make your friends and fans stakeholders in your success. Again, I think many of us believe we're drowning in contacts nowadays. So one of the frameworks I also teach is how to prioritize your relationships and the different ways you invest in those different sets of relationships. But ultimately, you do this kind of stuff right. This exercise specifically, not only will you continue to invest in these relationships, but you'll stay top of mind and tip of tongue. Now, if you have a business, this will lead to word of mouth. When it comes to your organization, again, we've grown MMT without a penny spent on traditional advertising over the last 8 years. It's grown all through word of mouth. And even, in the context of opportunities for you personally, this is a great way to stay top of mind. So I was inspired by friends of mine who were sending email updates with their organization. So they were coining them or positioning them as investor updates. They just had a core group of friends where they would send these updates to every quarter, let's say. And then I started to see, this is a friend of mine, Jay Papazan, who is one of the big guys at Williams, what is it? Keller Williams, that's what it is, Keller Williams Real Estate. And he co-wrote the book, The One Thing. And he started doing these. And I drew inspiration from it as another friend of mine's V started doing these more on the personal side. And again, inspired by Cameron Harold and Vivid Vision, that taking that framework and applying it to business has had, great success in our community. A lot of MMTers and entrepreneurs have really doubled down on their Vivid Visions, and it's been amazing. And Cameron, leads with this stuff. He just doesn't talk about it. His Vivid Vision is very prominent and can easily be found. I've had other friends do these year in reviews, blog posts, and that kind of stuff. And for me, I kind of use these as the foundation and took it almost maybe another level. I'm a firm believer that relationships move at the speed of vulnerability. And if you don't share your struggles, people won't buy your successes. So I started to lean into doing my own updates like this, sharing it with a core group of friends. The email list was probably 30 people at first, and then 60, and then 100. I'll actually, if Cameron wants, I'll share with you all the emails that I have as a framework. You can visit them on your own. But that was the first one I did in 2018. I did another one in 2020. This is one of the most recent ones. So I've gone into more of a cadence of once a year. And this one I actually accompanied a video, which I didn't know if anybody would watch, but I was very honest of there's a conversation of us getting acquired for MMT. I've led my hand into farming over the last little bit, and there's been a ton of failures there. My mother went to rehab last year. So just being very kind of forward about all of these things, and then broke it down into both this email and this web page, and posted the video on YouTube as well, unlisted for friends. Again, not knowing if anybody would watch it or read any of it. And the response was incredible. When I did that first email in 2018, it had 73% open and 19% unique clicks, and then 10% of people replied. Some people send me text messages and those kind of things. So it's been one of the best things I do for myself once a year. And again, you can see all the comments, 66 comments, 47 comments, 34 comments off that one email. And some of the responses were just acknowledging, the email and how much they appreciated it. Others, they were sharing updates of their own, which was beautiful. Some, brought voice to challenges that they were navigating. This individual, their ex-wife passed away in November as a result of addiction. So for me, again, relationships move at the speed of vulnerability. And if you want people to be vulnerable, you lead with vulnerability. So I have lots of examples of this kind of stuff. But the one thing I will say is this is as a result of me investing in relationships for many years and building rapport. So if you lean into this exercise, which I highly recommend you do, build a small email list of some of your core friends, people who are investors in you to some degree. It's absolutely amazing what can come from it. But I did want to, as a disclaimer, say your response will be in direct proportion to the level of rapport and the amount of effort that you put into crafting your email. When I crafted my email, it easily took me like 40 hours to do. I just kept on refining it and editing it, and was more, honest and that kind of stuff in the process. But the funny thing is, 40 hours sounds like a lot. If I actually look at the YouTube, this is old data. I'd actually be interested to take a look at what it is now. But the average duration of people just watching the video was 12 minutes. Meaning, if I looked at there was 200 views for that video, and it was on average 12 minutes each, that's 208 hours of conversation that I saved myself for. So the scalability was huge. So I basically now, if somebody wants to reconnect with me, and instead of spending half the conversation of hey, what's going on in your world, I just share with them that webpage. And yeah, people love it. So you can do this in various different ways. Again, my friend Jay Papazan does them all the time, every couple of months, every couple of weeks, he does some kind of update. I've leaned into doing it just once a year, and because I put so much effort into it, but it is by far one of the best things I do to nurture relationships, and for people to feel like they're still connected to me, so to speak. So that is the second thing. The third one is around the question list. If you go to bit.ly, so bit.ly/COO Alliance questions, you'll see the full list there. It's over 400 questions that I've curated over the years. Again, people use these for their team meetings. They use them for their offsites. They use them just for general kind of networking. Some of my favorites. You'll see that they're also, we got to go in and clean it up a little more. So take a look at the list again in a couple of weeks. But we also are going to organize them from a level of intimacy and vulnerability. So some of the fun ones, if you were to kick off a meeting, is if you were to make a cookbook, what would be on the front cover? What culture other than your own do you find most fascinating? You're in hell, what's for dinner? You see a theme here with food. I love food, what can I say? But for those of you that embrace the idea of bring your whole self to work, there's some questions there that do a beautiful job at that. One is, what makes you hard to live with? This always brings some really interesting conversations. What did you have to overcome to become who you are today? This is a great question I use in the context of hosting dinners and that kind of stuff. This one we asked recently as a team, and it brought up some really meaningful conversations. What aren't people talking enough about? And this one specifically, we used to start every single meeting with it, but it just evolved into too much of a deep conversation in a beautiful way, but we ruined our meetings as a result. And the question was, what is keeping you from being 100% present with us today? So we would start every meeting because we want to bring voice to those things that are kind of bubbling behind the surface for all of us individually, so we can honor them and somewhat table them, so to speak, so we can get down into the conversation of the meeting. So I don't know, what Cameron's philosophy is on that. I got to read his book again on meetings suck, because I think I'm breaking the rules there, but feel free to use that question set however it suits you. And that's all I got for you, ladies and gentlemen. So Cameron, floor is yours.
No.
Thank you, Richard, for the clap. I appreciate it, my man.
The floor is still yours. I just got bombarded with comments during your talk. People going, "Wow, holy shit, this guy's amazing!" Tweetable moments. So first off, for all of the attendees, if you've got some questions, and hopefully you do, we left some time for questions on, building community, leveraging your network. Put your hand up right now so that you can start asking the questions, and I'll call on you to do that. I'd love to be able to have you ask those verbally. And then I'm going to have a couple of questions to get us started as well. But we're also going to be sharing this video with all of our members, both who attended and the other 100-ish that were not on the call today. So you'll all be able to see that in the member portal. Second, we'll have the slides of Jayson's. Jayson, you'll be able to share your slides, right?
100%. And the videos with audio.
Yeah, so we'll have the slides to share. And then Vashti, in our recap email that we send out after every event, is going to pull some of the kind of quotable quotes, because I couldn't write them down fast enough. And those are always fun to be able to insert into our daily discussion. So yeah, any questions you've got, please throw your hand up. Jayson, I've got a couple that are, one that I want to start with right now, because I know you well and I've seen you do this. So when you're at one of your events, and I know that a lot of us have, company conferences or, events for our customers, et cetera. When you're at an event that you're running, how do you try to, or how do you spend some time with the people that matter, or the people that you want to, when you're being pulled in 150 different directions? I mean, you've got a 3.5 day MMT event, 150 people there. How do you spend time with them?
That is like something I can't say I got figured out, in the sense that I think there's not an expectation from those that join us that they're going to get one-on-one time with me. It is actually an act that I do try to, or something I try to take action on, to have one meaningful interaction, whether it's a handshake, a hug, a little conversation with everybody over those 3.5 days. But I also think it's also not an expectation from those that are kind of in our community. But like, one thing is that like, that's my Super Bowl. For those 3.5 days, I'm getting no sleep. I'm going to try to stay at the bar as late as possible to like see as many people as I can. I'm going to try to wake up early. I've gotten much better at like doing a lot of the heavy lifting in advance, because those early days when you joined us, in between talks from the stage, I was working behind the scenes on my slides, right? So it was a little more kind of last minute there. But it's meaningful. It's meaningful for everyone to feel seen. And I do a lot of things of like calling people out from the stage. So I integrate a lot of individuals like into my slide deck and that kind of stuff. And also try to be very cognizant of like, especially those that are more quieter, that are maybe not as notable in the room, to continuously kind of bring them into the conversation.
Yeah, that's something I've noticed as well. And I think I was at the bars later than you were, but you were always up earlier than I was. So
I'm getting older.
Used to make the morning fitness and yogas, and I would be like trying to recover. But I can beat you now in the mornings, I think. So one of the things I've noticed as well is that you've done a really good, because you're a very gregarious kind of entrepreneurial, fairly type A individual, but you have a really good connection with some very kind of analytical, amiable, more introverted people. I'm blanking on his name right now, from New York, curly hair. His hair is always kind of crazy. The first couple of MMT.
James Altucher.
James Altucher. James is very quiet, very kind of amiable, right? Like a more introverted person, but you have a really good relationship with him. How do you have to adapt your style to build the relationships with people, or build the connections with people that aren't like you?
Yeah, well, I think I'm a closeted introvert to some degree. I mean, there's what has helped me, like even when it comes in the context of like speaking, or I don't go to networking events anymore, thankfully. But when I did, one of the tactics that helped me have this almost like extroverted side was Todd Herman's alter ego effect, and he talks about it like beautifully, of like how it's a philosophy used in like sports, where an example he gives, and he gives many examples, but like he met Bo Jackson once, and Bo Jackson was super sweet. He's a football player, super sweet off the field, but he was known to be really aggressive and mean on the field. And Bo Jackson told him that, the real Bo Jackson has never played a down in football in his life, but like when he steps his left foot, specifically his left heel, on the field, he like switches into this alter ego. So I've been able to embrace that and not be a chameleon necessarily, but like my natural nature is to bring people together and be, on the side of the room watching everybody connect and hold that container. That's holding the container has been one of my biggest areas of focus and growth and development over the last couple of years. So as a result of like just being an introvert and being able to see people and creating space for them, it's given me the ability to kind of foster relationships with people who are either very extroverted or incredibly introverted, because I can definitely I can empathize being one myself.
Sure. Okay. Again, if you've got questions, ask them, or I'm going to monopolize because I've got a couple of questions I want to go with. Jayson, one question I've got is, when you started kind of post running your company and deciding to start running the dinners, 10, 11 years ago, you ran these mastermind dinners, and I think you've got a book called Mastermind Dinners that I highly recommend. One of the things I love about the dinners is you run these small dinners of like 6 to 8 people. And I know you've done some that are a little bigger, maybe 12, 16 people, but I think your magic number is around the 6 to 8 people, right? Where you host a dinner. Can you give us some of the reasons why you host them, and maybe how some of the members could host dinners with I would say potential clients or current clients, or even just building their network on the road. I like it when you're on the road traveling as well.
It's an incredible, quote unquote network building tool. So that was originally what preceded MMT. As we started doing dinners, I felt when I left, I had an e-commerce business, which after doing that for 6 years, realized I built a business I hated to enable me to buy things I didn't need, to impress people I didn't like. So I realized I was out of alignment, and slowly transitioned out of that business and felt very isolated, which is why one of the benefits of something like COO Alliance, like with the stats I often share in the context of being an entrepreneur, is let's say you and I want to do a dinner with 30 entrepreneurs. Well, they represent 3% of the general population. So we'd have to stop 1,000 people at random to meet 30 entrepreneurs and bring them together for dinner. If we wanted to meet entrepreneurs with 7-figure businesses, they represent 4% of that 3%. So we'd have to stop 25,000 people at random to put together a dinner of 30 entrepreneurs with 7-figure businesses. I don't know what the statistics are around COOs, but they are more rare. I know that for a fact. I listened to Gino Wickman's book. I think he said there's like 1 COO for every 3 entrepreneurs. So you could just think of the statistics of, like, if you find yourself in a group of 50 COOs, what an incredible opportunity that is. And you've done so much of the heavy lifting. And why that's important is because the stronger the uncommon commonality is that people share, the stronger the bond. So if I do a dinner with 30 random people, it may go well. If I do a dinner with 30 COOs, it'll probably really go well, because they live and breathe a certain lifestyle and have the same wants and fears, and navigating oftentimes the same obstacles. If I bring together a group of COOs that have 7-figure businesses or lead businesses of $25 million or more, as you work down that funnel, it's an incredible opportunity. So for me, I started doing these dinners really because I just felt lonely and isolated. And I want to bring together entrepreneurs and then just be a fly on the wall and just be around fascinating people, because I don't consider myself as one. And continue to do those dinners. And it turned out to be a great quote unquote marketing tool, especially in those early days. And I actually was inspired by Seth Godin. So somebody gave me a ticket to go see Seth Godin, one of his workshops in New York. And I didn't know what it was about, but it turned out the theme of it was the connection economy and how there's huge value connecting like-minded individuals. And he shared a story of a gentleman named Thornton May, who basically was the business development for a IT firm. And he knew that if he wanted to build a large business in the IT space, he needed to get like the 500-pound gorillas or 800-pound gorillas in that industry. So he focused on the Fortune 500. So he would fly to Texas and reach out to this CIOs were the decision makers for him. So he reached out to the CIO of Texaco, the CIO of Coca-Cola, and say, hey, I'm doing a dinner or doing a breakfast with all these other CIOs. There's no cost to you or what have you. Do you want to join? And it's so rare that CIOs, or in this case, COOs, have an opportunity to be in the presence of others that are similar to them. Everybody would take them up on that opportunity. And inevitably, they would talk shop at these breakfasts, and they would talk about some of the challenges they're having regarding IT. And lo and behold, like the person who brought them together was, Thornton May. And they would inevitably kind of turn to him. And ultimately, that IT firm became this like multi-billion-dollar IT firm in the States several years ago. So it's a strategy that works exceptionally well.
I went to one of your dinners that you hosted in Vancouver, and there were 7 of us that got invited. You were the 8th person. And I remember meeting Val Steinberg, who's one of my closest friends. And I met Curtis Christofferson and Mac Christofferson and Greg Smith. And like, I met 2 clients from that dinner, 2 people that went on to become clients, and 4 really good friends, and had an amazing dinner. And what I love about the way you host these dinners for this networking and building the network is you usually have a couple people that you know and a bunch of people you don't know. Yeah. And then you don't order bottles of wine. You hold it at a nice restaurant, just at a normal table kind of out in the corner. and people order whatever drink they want. And I think the price per head comes out to like about $100 per person at the end of the night, because you don't get all super fancy with it. It's a really elegant.
It's the best investment I can make. We've never spent a penny on traditional advertising. I cut a check for $1,000, $2,000 all the time to do these dinners, and I would smile because inevitably, like, I wasn't doing it for those reasons, but like there's a lot of social capital that is built in that environment, so to speak, and it comes back to you. I mean, the nice thing is now, oftentimes we don't invest in relationships because we can't peg an ROI to it. It's easy to say, if I go to this event or I go to this workshop, it's going to do XYZ for my sales or XYZ for my business. Relationships aren't as tangible, but as Steve Jobs famously said, you just need to trust that the dots will somehow connect in the future. And for me, I've been investing heavily in relationships for the last 8 to 10 years. I can now connect the dots looking backwards and say, oh, that, one person I hosted at a dinner inevitably led to like this, and that. And like, these are relationships. As long as I don't die tomorrow, the ROI from these relationships are going to be, tremendous. So for me, it's an absolute no-brainer. You can use it as a relationship building tool where you're not trying to tackle an ROI to it. You can use it as a business development tool where you're hoping to generate kind of clients from it. It works exceptionally well because it's a soft sell, and you're coming from a place of like generosity and that kind of stuff. And just to close the loop on the conversation around like dinners of 6, that has become the best number I've seen, because you can have one unifying conversation. I think we've all been to dinners where it's like this long table of 20, 30 people, and it looks great for photos, but then there's multiple conversations going on. It's easy to get distracted. Sometimes you're sitting at one end of the table and there's an amazing conversation happening at the other end, and you have a little bit of FOMO and that kind of stuff. So even if I'm hosting a dinner for 100 people, I try to have tables of 6 instead of just one long table.
Yeah, I took your idea of the mastermind dinners and I I met Greg Smith from Thinkific at your dinner. I'm now a client of Thinkific. And then I hosted a dinner for COOs. Amber Cooper, who's on this call, came to that dinner. And then so did Miranda, and Miranda from Thinkific joined as a member. So I landed 2 clients from the dinner, and then I hosted one at my home. I just said, well, I'll just hold it at my home. And we did it as a potluck, and people just brought food. And that was dead simple because didn't cost me anything. Everybody brought wine and food. And at the end of the night, we just cleaned up. I was like, well, that was amazing. So it's a really easy way to actually connect. And I just encourage everybody who's listening I dropped the link for mastermind dinners into the chat as well to pick that up. It's an easy book to read through, but have your sales team think about how they can use it. Have your marketing team think about it. Have your CEO think about how you can network differently. Because I think what we used to do for networking is dead, right? Going to the 300 person event and walking around and trying to hand out a business. Expect anything to happen from that is really dead.
Yeah, I mean, and you do, I think you did something around TED, right? Like when TED goes to Vancouver, you do dinners, and it's brilliant. And that I've actually heard, I haven't been to TED personally, but I've heard that like the culture is like, some people just fly into Vancouver. A lot of people just go for the dinners. They actually don't go to the TED conference because the relationships are forged at the dinner. So it's a great opportunity. Historically, when I used to go to events and attend events, I would always, as long as I'm not stepping on the toes of like the person producing the event, I'd always host dinners. It was a no-brainer. And again, cutting a check for $3-4 grand, the ROI has been absolutely insane as you look into the future. So I've never looked at it from a business development perspective, but I can promise you it's an incredible business development tool. And Mastermind Dinners is obviously a great resource, but I also did a podcast episode on the Community Made podcast. If you go to communitymade.com, there's a podcast episode called Becoming a Catalyst. That's basically a podcast episode where I did a mastermind dinner in my own town of Waterloo, Ontario, where I didn't know anybody. So I was starting from scratch from a network perspective. And I outlined step by step how I sent invitations, how I got people there. And it was an incredible connection. Like, I had 40 people at that dinner, and still many of them are super close friends.
Awesome. We will drop that into the recap email that we send out to all the members. I also just dropped the Becoming a Catalyst podcast episode into the chat as well. Last question I've got is, and in case anybody doesn't have one, but last question I've got then is, what do you use as a CRM, or are you still using your spreadsheet methodology to keep track of your leads? No. But how do you keep track of who you're meeting and manage that? And do you manage it down to that Dunbar's number? Do you try to throw out, old ones and stick to the 150?
Well, yeah, I mean, I did a podcast episode actually on how to prioritize relationships, which walks through that framework of how you look at like your core relationships, your community relationships, your fans, your fringe, all that kind of stuff that kind of breaks it down. For us, I mean, when I was a solo, entrepreneur, so to speak, it was very like napkin based and in spreadsheets, and that wasn't a problem. Now that I've built more of a team, we've had to migrate to HubSpot. The CRM doesn't matter as much as like the what you capture and how you capture it, which is why like that framework around like what they care about, who they care about, important dates and milestones, and that kind of stuff. You can put that in HubSpot, you can put that in Salesforce, you can put it in Full Contact, or I don't even know if that's a CRM anymore. But I don't say it's irrelevant, but like the platform is less important to the actual strategy, so to speak. And again, we've incorporated it into our team meetings. So I'm not the only one trying to hunt down important dates and milestones that people are having, or the name of people's children, and that kind of stuff. The whole team comes together once a week for our team meeting to bring voice to anything they captured. It goes in our project management software, and then we have a relationship manager on the team that then takes that and puts it into the CRM.
I like it. Well, I know Don DePonte's book just came out. You and I both dropped a post about it. I saw you post, so I posted right afterwards. But if you want to maybe do a thinking of you to Don DePonte, instead of me reaching out to him to ask him to be a guest on one of our CO Alliance events, if you want to maybe suggest to him that he'd be a guest on a CO Alliance event, we'll get Don to speak.
Him and I were texting yesterday, so
yeah, I've shared the stage with him a few times. He'd be great for this group. Tiffany, you've got the final question.
Thank you. Thanks, Cameron. Hey, Jason, thank you so much for the awesome tips and very tactical. My question is kind of around how do you marry these kinds of really hands-on relationship oriented, very personalized tactics with we're trying to keep our sales team focused on sales, and we created a marketing ramp. So like the scalability factor is very much on my mind, with how to not just make it like scalable, like it's obviously that's just not that's not in alignment with that. But if there's a way to like systematize it, does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. I mean, listen, there's a gap. There's like people that don't care about relationships at all. And then there's me that has gone over the deep end. We're like to the point that like our renewal for our membership, our last cohort renewed at a rate of 96%. Some of that is a result of like our product being good. There's some of that, obviously, that I have a relationship with a lot of those people. So I know, like to me, as we continue to grow and build a team and that kind of stuff, I don't think my relationships are going to have as much of a pull as we continue to grow. And so I need to let go of that expectation. But building systems, so like historically, if somebody's having a child, let's say, that would go into my head. And then I would be like, okay, now I got to find a gift or what have you. Now what we do is we have a set of like triggers. So if somebody has a child, okay, now we know that like on the first Father's Day, a gift is going to have to go out to the father, and if on Mother's Day, gift is going to go out to the mother, and we have 3 different options as far as gifts are concerned. So I'm hands off from that perspective. The team is catching these triggers now. Sometimes I catch them, but now we've built systems and processes kind of around that. And then the tricky part that we do have is like, we are a very relationship business, focused business. So I have a very strong relationship with everybody that we serve. Our team members also build really strong relationships with the community, which doesn't replicate if we let them go and we find somebody new. So there's certain unique aspects to our business that again doesn't transition well to like if you had a sales team of 50 people or whatever the case may be. But some of the principles do. And again, like the gift giving, the capturing, that kind of stuff, you can build systems and processes and triggers around that. And again, one example is that friend of mine that had his assistant, her core role was to keep her finger on the pulse of like interesting things that were happening in their client's world. Now, some of them are like more public on social media. You might have clients that like don't post on social media at all, and that's totally fine. There's things that we have in those cases as well, as far as triggers for me to like check in with a text message every quarter. Like if somebody's not super active or what have you online, I'll check in with a quick, like, I'll send like a quick, text that says like thinking of you or whatever the case may be. So again, some of this stuff, it loses its magic. There's a saying that like some businesses are mechanical and some are magical. MMT definitely falls more on the magical side, but as we grow, as we scale, as we remove me more from the day-to-day, my goal is that we move, certain things get, mechanicalized, so to speak, but we do keep some of that magic in there as well.
Awesome. Jayson, thank you so much for presenting. If everybody wants to go off mute, give Jayson a huge round of applause. And if Jayson, thank you so much for the time, for the gift of the time and the resources you've shared. I know that for your Mastermind Talks event that's coming up in January, you're going to be sold out, but I'm sure you'll have a few spots available. If any of our members, CEOs, are good, fun, open, vulnerable, run cool businesses, and you want them to plug into a community like this, drop me an email. I'll introduce you to Jayson, and let's see if we can at least get them into the interview process. They have a very good interview process to select who gets to come to them. But I think it would be an amazing gift to give your CEO as an ability to go to one of these events of his if you can. So let's try to make that happen. Jayson, thanks so much for sharing.
Yeah, and the barrier to entry is if your CEO treats you good. If he doesn't, I want nothing to do with him or her. So, all right, everyone. Thank you.